What does the publishing landscape look like in 5 years?
Or what will it look like in 5 years? I have no idea. Honestly, I think what will happen is the few transnational mega corporations that still deem publishing an important line, even if it's a debt line, to have in their overall balance sheet will have claimed 90% of what we think of as a publishing landscape. So, Bertelsmann will own Random House and Penguin and Putnam and this and that and the other. There'll be 3 or 4 of those.
Okay.
Right? And that will be like CBS, NBC, and ABC of the publishing landscape.
Okay.
And then there will be 200 or 300 really good independents who will be the AMC and the FX and the HBO and the Showtime and the Discovery Channel and the Home Shopping Club, where the actual cool, exciting stuff will happen. Mm-hmm. So there'll still be, you're going to do the biography of Hillary Clinton. You're going to go to one of the big 3, just like, Lance Armstrong, well, he didn't actually, should have gone, to Barbara Walters for the confessional. And the vast majority of us doing something interesting like Walking Dead or The Sopranos or Boardwalk Empire or Game of Thrones are going to be at one of the many cool independent publishers.
Right. What about in 10 or 15 years? Will the traditional publishers still have a role, or will authors become a business model in and of themselves?
Well, authors are it's lonely being an author.
Yeah.
Right? You already write alone. Publishing alone kind of feels to me like it defeats the point. So what I think will happen as we move into an increasingly, author-driven distribution universe is we'll have little teams. Like the best blogs are sort of these teams of people, like Boing Boing, 6 or 7 or 8 people. And you invite people into your group. So instead of the book being driven, by the blurbs on the back of the thing, it'll be, what team did this come from? So if me and Cory Doctorow and David Pescovitz and Andrew Zoli and Tim O'Reilly all belong to some just group, and we put out our stuff. So we're indie publishing, but we're doing it more like almost the United Artists model in the 70s, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So in your book, Program or Be Programmed, you offer 10 commandments for taking control.
10
commands. 10
Because commandments are for the Bible. Commands are for empowered people in a digital age.
Right. Well, why is it so important for people to do that, to take control of their digital life?
Well, if they don't take control of their digital life, then their digital life's being controlled by somebody else. Programs execute. They execute. So they don't just sit there, they're active. So if you're not the one who told the program what to execute, then something's being executed on you. Right. If you're not the true user of these technologies, then you're the used. Okay. So I do think digital literacy is kind of a key component to maintaining agency if you're living on a digital landscape. I don't know that everyone's going to be able to, program the Python app of their dreams, but I think they can know enough about digital languages and digital platforms to be able to assess them critically, to be able to understand, what is this app really for? And people don't do that. They don't think critically. Teachers will use Blackboard and just conform to it, and they conform to the software, conform to the platform before they understand someone made it like this for a reason, right? And usually it's to take your money or your soul.
Right. So along those same lines, you've been writing about raising digital kids at home. Can you talk a bit about the impact of digital media on children?
Yeah. How is the question? I mean, digital media impact kids both, I mean, as far as content and as tools.
Okay.
Right. So, there's painfully little research on how the actual tool affects the kid. I mean, I remember back in the day, McLuhan, the media theorist, was asking, is anyone doing studies on what's the effect of the actual cathode ray tube on the brain? Just the flickering and that. And it's like, that wasn't ever really done. So it's like, how he wanted to know, the medium is the massage. How is this actually working on you? So when I look at digital media and little kids, and especially today's digital media, which is almost all based on flat screens, I think one of the primary and little studied effects is having them engage with two-dimensional reality for so much of their day. Mm-hmm. These are kids whose brains, from 1, 2, 3, 4, really till you're about 5 or 6 years old, you're still developing your sense of spatial reality. Where things are, your sort of 3D, your 3D axes are still being worked out. And if you're looking at everything in 2D, I don't think you're quite training that properly. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of one of those people who likes really limited screen time for kids when their brains are in that state. I'm really into kind of recapitulating our civilization's media evolution in the individual's evolution. So it's like if you start out and you draw in sand or drop balls, and then you learn to write, and then you can hear stuff on a radio or record player, and then you move up to radio and TV and computers. So that if you follow that path, it's kind of an interesting consonance with your developmental stages. The big difference for kids, I mean, it's funny, I just thought about this the other day, seems to be, when I was a kid in the electric universe, as opposed to this digital universe, I watched a lot of TV and watched a lot of movies as a consumer. And I would, go to Spencer Gifts, this place in the mall, and you get like posters of the things you like, right, or record albums, and you'd put them up on the wall of your room, and it would kind of reflect back to you who you were. And you might bring a friend into your room and they can look and go, oh, that Farrah Fawcett poster's not really cool anymore. And you'd reflect and create your sense of self. Now that wall is not something that's in your room. Now that wall is your Facebook wall, right? That wall is something you're projecting out. So your identity formation is not just a public act, but is a broadcast act. It's self-marketing, and I think that's tricky for a person because one, it's permanent, right? It's on your timeline or on someone else's. Even if you take it away, it's always there. So you're creating a record, this digital footprint of yourself from birth or from wherever you go online onward. And second, it's not personal anymore. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder about, not that it's better or worse, it's just different, right? So there isn't individual ego formation anymore. There's not this or that. And then the other big bias shift is towards metrics. That kids have numbers of friends and numbers of followers and numbers of that. And it's odd because when I was a kid, I remember wondering, there were popular kids, the super popular kids, but the actual groups of popular kids were really small compared to our groups of unpopular kids. Yeah. It's just like 4 kids, and they're the popular ones, but they just hang out, that's them. And it's like, what does that mean that they were popular? It meant that we believed something about them.
Right.
But they were off in their own. But now popularity has to do with how many friends and followers you have. So it's sort of the opposite. It's sort of, to be popular, it's an anti-elitist thing as opposed to an elitist thing. So I'm real interested on how does that change the rules, the gamesmanship of childhood.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. For my last question, your new book is called Present Shock. What is that, and how should it be addressed?
Present Shock is a book, and it should be addressed to your home. You click the buy button. Sorry, I couldn't help it. I've been out there with these guys, and this is such a conference about, it's funny, I mean, it's about selling books, you know what I mean? It's not so much about writing books, so how are we distributing, and how is the industry going to be, and what's the business model and the thing. And I just so rarely think about my books from that standpoint. I'm just like, how am I going to keep their attention from this to that? How am I going to maintain that and maintain their awareness? Or how am I going to make this point? And I just don't see people like, it's a books conference. I don't see people arguing or wondering about how do we maintain the rhetoric of space. And
right.
It's not there, which is okay. But present shock is. It's really about the human response to living in a simultaneous, always-on, post-narrative, pervasive, instantaneous culture.
Okay.
You know, it's not about, digital technology is doing this to us or whatever. It's more about that we've moved from the industrial age and the analog clock and linear time to the digital age, in which time is very different. It's this series of pulses. It's sort of the difference between an analog clock and a digital clock. Mm-hmm. And it's what McLuhan would call a digital media environment, but he didn't live to see one or think of what one was like. And in a digital media environment, you know, everything's different. So then how do we as people respond to that? How do businesses respond to a digital presentist marketplace in which people no longer invest for the future of a company, but invest in order to make money on the trade in the moment? You know, what does that do? You know, when people bought Facebook, they were disappointed because they didn't make money that day.
Right.
It's like, well, wait a minute. That's a derivative. So they're already thinking in terms of derivatives. But there's people trading derivatives of derivatives of derivatives. So it's like the moment, it's almost like how many algorithms can we stick on the head of a temporal pin in some ultra fast reality. Or I look at the way, how do you make sense of the world when you no longer have narratives and stories to understand it? We don't have time for that. We try to make sense of things almost visually, like a map. It's sort of like when you move from PowerPoint to Prezi. It's like the aha of Prezi is, it's all right there in the same chart at the same moment. You know, and if you can't make it have one picture like that, then it must not really be true, right? Because you needed time to tell this thing. I mean, you know, and what does that do? What does that do to media? How do we lose narrative media and move into sort of reality TV, which doesn't have, or just not the requirement of narrative the same way? Or I look a lot at, there's a chapter I call Apocalypto, which is our intolerance for presentism, our intolerance for living in the present, just wishing it would end rather than stay on this plateau. You know, and that's everyone from Ray Kurzweil and Kevin Kelly to Dan Pinchbeck and the 2012 people. You know, even if you want to believe that human beings are just one stage in information's inexorable rise to greater complexity, I mean, go believe that. But I'm not going to join you. I'm here for the humans. You know.
All right.
And the other thing I look at a lot, and I'm really interested by, is the way that digital time tends to ignore biological time. You know, and you know, they used to laugh at people for talking about jet lag. They didn't believe jet lag. You know, the Major League was starting to find out that pitchers seem to do better if they traveled east to west than west to east. And there are all these studies, and that doesn't make sense. It's the same. Why would that be? And they finally discovered jet lag, and the State Department uses it when they're figuring out their negotiations. And now the pitching rotations go by jet lag, because they understand it's real. Well, there's all these other biological clocks and circadian rhythms that we're just coming to understand, like the lunar cycle. You know, so there's 4 weeks in a lunar cycle, and during each one of those weeks, a different brain chemical tends to dominate your chemistry. So you move from a week of acetylcholine to a week of serotonin to a week of dopamine to a week of norepinephrine. And if you know that, this is a norepinephrine week, you're like, okay, we're in fight or flight response, so we're going to be a little more paranoid. We're going to think more systematically, and we're going to look at things in a more calculated lizard way. If we're in a dopamine week, it's time to party. People are going to be more loose. They're going to want to do that. You're on a serotonin week. Okay, let's work, and everybody get their thing done and make their arguments and do it. You're in an acetylcholine week. What are you going to do? Well, you know, it's sort of like about beginnings and friendships and seeing how things are. And if you understand that not just you, but your whole company, your whole world, your consumers are all in those patterns, it's like, oh, this is real. This is not superstition. This is not a druid necessarily, although maybe the druids knew it. It seems like it, but it's real. So I'm sort of looking at how can we reclaim kind of biological time, even if we're going to live in this digital universe that kind of pretends that one moment is just like any other.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much for talking with me today.
Thank you. Enjoy your O'Reilly TOC. Publish well. Move into the digital. Become interactive. And love people.
Excellent.